Hey everyone, and welcome to Screams After Midnight. I am Peter, that is Tim, and we talk about horror movies on this show. And this is October, is Octoberthon, and we're doing lots of extra episodes, and it's all chaos and chaotic, and oh my god, I'm so tired. We're always tired at the end of the month, although that feels a bit fake to say that this time, because we're recording a lot of these episodes in advance. But still, I'm sure I'll be tired by the time this airs. I'm positive of it. So, much like we did the Slumber Party Massacre trilogy last year, we did all three movies in October. This year, we're doing all three Re-Animator movies, and this is the second of those movies. This is Bride of Re-Animator. Did the first one, presumably it went up last week, and this is now the second one. I have not seen this one before. This was a first time watch for me. I'd only seen the original. I've seen the original a few times, but the sequels I'd never gotten to. Had you seen this one before?
Not this one.
Really? Okay.
If I did see it, I'd like forgotten everything.
Okay.
'Cause, I specifically remember I have a friend who's a big fan of all these movies, and I specifically remember we sat down and watched Beyond Re-Animator, but I don't know if he didn't have Bride or if for whatever reason we didn't watch that one, but yeah, I specifically remember watching the third one, but not this one.
Okay. So we'll start spoiler free as we always do, and we'll warn you somewhere in the middle before we go into spoilers. So I actually didn't expect anyone but Jeffrey Combs to be back, so I was actually kind of surprised that Dan was back as one of the main characters, and even the head of what was his name, Doctor
Hill.
Hill. There you go.
Hill.
There you go. Other Hill. There you go. Yeah, he's back. In fact, the movie opens with I mean, it's not until the title sequence, but you see like his head just floating in like a black screen saying, "This was you, West. I'm coming for you, West." And I'm like, okay, all right. And it's set 8 months after the first film, and they refer to the events of the first film as a massacre that happened at the hospital that's still being investigated. And we see that West and Dan were in South America at a civil war as medical volunteers, but secretly were experimenting. And it seems that Dan's a lot more along for the ride. Presumably Meg died, at the start, because obviously he tried to save her at the end of the last one, but clearly that didn't work. And they're trying their tests out on various bodies. Although Dan still seems shocked and horrified by everything that West does. Still, I'm like, you've been with him for 8 months doing these weird experiments. I feel like by this point you should be used to it. And they get a lizard that West is hoping will be the key ingredient to perfecting the formula, and they come back, and most of the movie surprisingly is set at the same hospital again. There's a lot of the same hospital, but they also have their new apartment, which is actually at the side of a cemetery, because of course it is. And they get this weird plan. West specifically, just as Dan's ready to like quit and say, "I'm not doing this anymore," he's like, no, we can build a new person. We can take, because there's like a hint in the hospital that some body parts have been going missing, and of course I immediately went, oh, of course. In fact, I laughed because the guy who's in charge of the morgue says, "Who would want to steal body parts?" and it cuts immediately to West, like creeping behind the door. And I was like, yep, that's the guy. So he gets this idea, and he convinces Dan by saying, "Hey, we'll build this new woman out of body parts, but we'll use, what did you love about Meg? You loved her heart." And he pulls out Meg's heart that he's got in a bag, and we'll use Meg's heart to build this new body. And I immediately had some critiques of this, because I'm like,
of course.
there's the whole thing about the heart being like, the source of love and all the rest. That's all a metaphor. It's not real. Like, the heart doesn't actually have anything to do with a person's personality or who they are or the soul or any such nonsense. It's about pumping blood throughout the body. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like holes you can point at with this plot, like especially like obviously Dan's like probably love struck and grief stricken and everything, but at the same time he is still a man of science.
Yes, he's a doctor. Yes, because I get that West is just saying this maybe to convince him, but like Dan buying into this is like, come on, Dan, you're a doctor, you're a surgeon. Like, come on. But yeah, so that's how he convinces them to stick around, and of course they are slowly building their body out of parts. Meanwhile, there's a detective who's determined to solve the massacre, and his own wife, who was a cadaver at the hospital, got reanimated. And they actually have a couple of the reanimated corpses kind of in containment. Like, they actually have like a blocked off like hospital room. So he's like out. It's personal for him, and he's convinced that West and Dan are involved in some way, so he's investigating them throughout the film. And that's kind of the gist of it. That is the gist of, and there's a new love interest actually. There's like someone that they met in Peru or whatever, is come to visit Dan, and she's this Italian lady who's obsessed with him and madly in love. So
Yeah.
he's helping Wes build a body to replace his like ex-girlfriend who died, but he's also falling for this Italian lady. And it never once occurs to him that maybe I should call off this whole body thing because there's an actual living, breathing woman who is very passionately into me. Maybe that's what we should do. But anyway, Tim.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy Bride of Re-Animator?
I would say for the most part, yeah. It's kind of weird because I do think the movie's kind of a mess. Like, and actually, I watched on the Blu-ray. I think there was like a one of those like 10-minute behind the scenes things where like Brian Yuzna basically talked about the movie and making it, and I think they like had like a really short time frame to kind of come up with a script and get this out. Actually, funny thing, they mentioned like the original idea for it sounded absolutely crazy, where it involved like them having to reanimate the president. Like Reagan was the president at the time, and like he gets shot, and like like everyone in real life he did get shot, but he survived. But in the movie, it's like he actually died. But then like the government asks these guys to reanimate, which that sounds pretty crazy, but might have been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a fun idea. That's kind of like, remember those rumors of Jurassic Park 4 before World came out for like years?
Oh God!
It was the government are going to like put lasers on their heads and they're going to be like smart dinosaurs. And I mean, there's kind of elements of that in Jurassic World 1 and 2, but it's not as extreme as the rumors were for a long time.
But basically though, I would say like this movie, it's the plot is just it's kind of bad, and like a lot of it is just kind of like echoing like the same beats of the first movie, but the stuff that does shine out for me is like obviously Jeffrey Combs is still great as Herbert West. Like it's anytime he's on screen, it's pretty enjoyable, and when it gets really crazy towards the end and like all the gore and kind of the makeup and like the effects and stuff, like that looked really cool and was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the effects are good. There's a lot of stuff in this where they basically make like little like mutated things that look like hands connected to feet that move around on their own and stuff like that. There's a lot of little things like that where they're really effective and look quite good.
Yeah. So overall, I would say like it's hard to, I don't know, like praise it too much because there's definitely like a lot of stuff that's like, oh, why are you doing this or whatever. But overall, I do think it is like an enjoyable watch. Definitely a step down from the first movie, but I still had fun with it.
Yeah, it's not bad. I feel like I'd agree that the plot is definitely kind of like thrown together and feels a bit of a mess, kind of like the Frankenstein creation itself. I felt like every time it cut to the detective doing his investigation, I felt like this is like a different movie. Why? This is weird.
Yeah, you can definitely it's not a bad plot to have, but the guy that played the detective, not that he's like a bad actor, but I don't really think it was that great in this role.
Yeah, it didn't feel like he fit here. It was kind of strange. It didn't feel like he fit in this movie. I think my other critique would be pacing. I think the first movie's got such a tight structure, such a tight pacing that builds and gets more ridiculous as it goes. I feel like this one, because it's in this weird place where we already had the first movie, it feels the need to do some outrageous things at the start, and then it kind of it's almost like it's buying time until it's ready to animate the body. Like there's less progression where in the first one, like it's like Dan kind of like stumbles into what West is up to. That stumbles into the first like experiment, which ends up killing the dean. Which stumbles into Hill finding out who's after Meg. Which stumbles into the big wacky ending with the severed head and everything going. Like it all kind of knocks into each other very, very neatly, and it keeps crescendoing. This movie is kind of like, okay, here's the idea. We're going to build this body, and then a good chunk of the movie is kind of like waiting to get to the point where we're ready to do that, as opposed to like actually naturally building. Like that's when it shifts to a lot of the detective stuff and the love interest coming to see him for dinner,
Mhm.
and that stuff. I mean, there's nothing inherently terrible about it. It just kind of feels like we're spinning our wheels a little bit to get to the good
Yeah.
stuff. Um, Especially when you can kind of see where it's going with a lot of it. You know the detective is probably going to die at some point, and they're going to reanimate him
Mhm.
in some way.
Yeah.
You know that's going to happen to some extent. Um, and there's not enough of Hell's Head because almost every scene with Hell's Head is great, but there's not enough
Yeah.
of it.
And what's funny is something else they mentioned on like the behind the scenes stuff
Mm.
is I believe it was that actor had actually reached out to Yuza and was kind of like, oh, so like you're doing another movie, so is there a part for me? Can I get in it? And he was kind of like, what are you talking about? Like we like we killed you in the last movie. Like we threw your head against the wall and like it went splat. But then he was like, well, all right, we'll make it work. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a big part of the first movie that it was nice to have him back, and he's
Yeah,
undeniably one of the better elements of this one. So I can't really fault it. But I just
definitely.
noticed I just noticed in the credits, by the way, the guy who runs the morgue in this one is called Doctor Graves, which it's a bit on the nose,
Okay.
bit on the nose, but I'll
Yeah.
allow it. I'll allow it.
I so now the this guy Brian Yuza I think he was like a big like a producer or something on the first one.
Yeah, he produced the first one.
Um and then he's kind of taken over the reins in this one. I feel like there's some stuff I want to compliment him on, and then some stuff like I don't like. I don't know if he's like the best director, but I do like. I like that there was like some of the way that this movie looked. Like it kind of felt like a little bit like a Giallo movie. Like there's really bright colors in
Hmm.
it. Like
The,
there's like this one
the,
scene where he. Oh yeah.
I was gonna say that I think I agree with that. There's some scenes towards the end with the Frankenstein creation herself that I think look really good and how it's
Yeah.
shot. Very very like strong reds and origins, and it's just like it's almost demonic, like screaming out in pain, kind of like
Yeah.
I thought that was really effective. I thought the stuff there's like a sort of finger hand monster with an eyeball at one point, and all that stuff looked really good. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm concurring.
Yeah, so there's like some I like the way like a lot of stuff like that looked, but then also stuff like I just didn't think maybe he was the best with like some of the actors, and then um this movie seemed a lot more quiet to me. Like it seemed like there was just scenes where yeah, it was just like there was like like no background or ambient music or anything. It just kind of like stood out to me as being a little weird.
Hmm.
Where like not like the first movie had like an amazing score, like definitely like the main theme music and stuff you recognize,
Which
but
does come back, of course. That's the
yeah,
opening theme again. Is the same music.
but I also didn't really remember any like very stark like oh this feels quiet or stuff. Where there's a couple times in this movie it kind of stood out to me.
Yeah. Um. It does despite like there's a big spike in how outrageous it gets in the last like 20-30 minutes, but
Yeah,
I think the first movie again going back to the pacing and the escalation. The first movie it kept like topping itself and escalate, in terms of the outrageousness, and it constantly felt like it was being outrageous right from the word go. It felt like we're seeing outrageous things, and it kept getting more outrageous. But this one, it felt like there'd be big lulls in the outrageous stuff. I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah,
Like
I agree.
after the it's like whenever it cut to the lab and it was Combs doing something, he'd have the hand foot monster, he'd have the little eyeball thing with the fingers. Like that stuff was great, but it felt very compartmentalized. Where it would be like, here's the main plot we're following, and then it would cut back to Jeffrey Combs in his lab doing something crazy, just to fill a quota. Just say, okay, so it's been 5 minutes since the last outrageous thing, so here's an outrageous thing that's separate from everything else, just so we can have an outrageous effect on the screen.
Yeah,
Uh, it didn't feel like it was as integrated into the main plot, and I guess that's kind of my biggest problem with the movie. Is it feels a little bit or compartmentalized. I guess is what I'm
or you
trying
could
to say.
say decompose.
Yes, decomposing. Yes, the movie's decomposed. Uh, but yeah, so that was weird. And like the new love interest is just kind of there, so it was like an innocent person who's like in danger, and that's about it.
Yeah, yeah, I think we'll go into like a bit more.
The spoilers, yeah.
Yeah, but it does feel weird to have the main kind of point of this movie is I mean it's called Bride of Re-Animator, so it is yeah kind of like this whole thing is making this bride to again kind of keep Dan around because he was so heartbroken over Meg and everything. So it is weird to shoehorn another love interest when it's like, oh, I thought the kind of the point was him, reanimating this love, but I don't know.
Yeah, and
And
like if the story was going to be that, oh no, he falls for someone else and realizes he's the error of his ways, and then tries to stop it and kill, but he never actually does try to stop it. He's kind of still like,
yeah,
he's in awe when it happens. He's like, oh my god, she's alive.
yeah,
um, so it's, and obviously Reanimator, there's a lot of comparisons to Frankenstein, which is why they titled the second one the same as, they borrowed the title Bride of Frankenstein for it essentially,
yeah.
which makes sense. So yeah, those would be my big complaints, I think. But there is fun scenes. There's definitely things I enjoy in there. Like I say, all the weird concoctions, the body parts that are on their own moving around, all that stuff looks great. With some nice visuals
And
towards the end, and Jeffrey Combs is great.
yeah.
As you said. So
And it still has like some like one of the another good thing about the first movie is it is definitely a horror movie, but there are some like humor elements,
mm,
and I thought that they still kept some of the humor in this too, which was nice.
yeah, I think you didn't have as good a script and you didn't have as good a
Mhm.
director, and I think that's kind of what made it fall down.
Definitely.
Um, Compared to the first one. So that's what I'd say. But I guess with that though, we'll give the spoiler warning and we'll go into spoilers for the movie. Um, so early on in the film, they introduced this terminal patient, this woman who Dan's taking like a personal interest in. He's like, "I'm going to
It's
save
like
you, I promise."
it's almost like a third love interest
It kind
for
of
him.
is because she's kind of oddly like flirting with him, even though she's on her
Yeah.
deathbed. And he's like, "Oh, you look good. You've even put on makeup." And she's like, "Oh well, my head's the only part of me that's well." And then I love that Jeffrey Combs because like with the light, he's like, "Yep, you're quite right. The head's quite well," and then just sort of butts back out. And then of course she ends up being the head of the Frankenstein, which I guess that's the point of it, is that once the creation was made, we had to like kind of connect with it in some way. So it's the head of the person we were kind of introduced to. Um,
Yeah. Uh, No, I don't want to like complain too much about it because it's like, it is what it is. Like it's a kind of horror movie that just kind of, takes up and goes. But I do have a lot of questions like from the last movie, um, uh, like one like kind of like how did West survive? Because it definitely didn't seem like, I mean, it doesn't say like one way or another if he dies or not at the end, but it definitely leaves like a little like all right, he's not really in like a good spot. And then like also like I don't know, like how are they still together? Like why were they in South America in the beginning for like 2 seconds, and then like why are they coming back in? Like I feel like there's a lot of questions that I don't know, maybe you're not supposed to
Sequel,
think about it too much, but
yes. We wanted a sequel, so Jeffrey Combs is still
yeah.
alive. That's your answer, Tim.
All right.
Because he's kind of in a similar place at the end of this one, where he's presumably buried under the rubble. But I mean,
Yeah.
we know he's back for the third one, so whatever. That's fine.
And
Uh,
like I mean, for it being what it is, like I get that it's just kind of like, don't worry about it too much. Like here we are, we're having fun, let's go. But at the same time, I can't help but have like some questions
yeah,
about how we got from the first one to this one.
yeah, that's fair. Do you know what's
Also, it's like wouldn't they kind of be like wanted men, like
Yeah,
kind of.
like no one really suspects them, and not only did they not get arrested or anything, they're actually working at the hospital as doctors. They've been hired.
Yeah, yeah. Like it'd be one thing if it was like, oh well, we had to move to Seattle, because the incident or something. But it's like, yeah, we're at the same place.
Yes, and no one even questions except this one detective, who's kind of a poor actor and
Yeah.
snoops around a lot. Um, to the point where he actually forces the new love interest into like the room with his dead wife.
Ugh.
And then later on, they try and like make us like feel better about him dying because like nah, like the wife didn't fall down the stairs. The wife was beaten to death by him. And then he becomes reanimated, and it's whatever. Which of course leads to the kind of the plot is that finally when the head comes back into it, when Hill comes back into it, he takes control of all the reanimated people that are kicking around. So he's got like a little army.
Yeah.
But then
Which I mean,
the best part, of course, is that he fuses his head with a reanimated bat, so he's now a flying head with bat wings. That's the thing that's happening. He's like,
yeah.
aha, West, I've come for you, West. You can't stop me now.
Kind of reminds me. I think it was before this movie, but it kind of reminds me of like Gremlins 2, where it's like, all right, how can we go like bigger, crazier
Oh, it's
with
after.
this? Oh, it is after. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Gremlins took him after this. Yeah.
Oh, oh yeah, yeah. That's what I
Oh,
meant.
that's what you
Yeah,
meant. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Fair
sorry.
enough.
Uh, but yeah, it was kind of I was thinking of that a little bit because like, oh yeah, like they're just really like amping up
Mm,
everything, and I like the like the dog with the human hand and
yeah.
all this kind of crazy stuff.
Well, a cat got in the last one, so it was only fair that a dog got killed in this one.
Yeah, which like I thought that was like it looks cool and everything, but I guess maybe a little bit of a complaint I have is it feels like maybe they were trying to mirror the first movie too much, like
Yeah.
you know to like I love the dog and everything, but at one point kind of feels like all right, well we need to have a guy snooping around again. We need to have a love interest with a pet again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Even like the original scene where you know, because originally it was Wes that's like dissecting the bat, right? And then like it kind of like gets loose and like is flying all over the place, and like that kind of remind me of like when the cat scene first gets reanimated in the
It
first
actually
movie.
wasn't West. It was Graves who was testing the bat. It was tested because he found some of the Re-Animator goop.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
So he was trying to find out what it was, and then he ended up fighting with the bat. And then he ends
Yeah.
up getting the head alive, and he's like, "Hey, assistant dude, who's like a surfer style guy who's always chewing gum,
Oh,
who
forgot
never
about
really
him.
goes anywhere. He's just there in a lot of scenes where like Wes comes to get like a body part. And he's like, oh, so and so wants you. I'll take care of the body. He's like, all right, bruh, and he just leaves. And that's like, he doesn't even die. He's just kind of there as this goofy character, which
Yeah.
is fine. Whatever. Not everyone needs to die.
Mhm.
He get out of this alive. He's laughing his ass off. He's good.
Yeah.
So here's a question. So love interest Francesca
Mhm.
comes over to make dinner.
Mhm.
Uh, all while West is in the basement, doing Frankenstein-esque shit.
Mhm.
But she's making dinner with Dan, and she ends up kissing him. It cuts to a love scene. They're having sex, and then later on, she comes down into the basement, sees the reanimated, corpse, the Frankenstein woman,
Mhm.
and is like, "Oh my God, you're sick!" And she wants to run away, and she thinks Dan's psychotic as well. And then by the end of the movie, she's just kind of like forgiving him, and she's like in his arms, like, and he's like
Yeah.
holding her, and they're in madly in love. In fact, at one point, like
Mhm.
the Frankenstein bride gets so like jealous because she's like going near Dan that she
Mhm.
comes over and like hits her away, and it turns into a cat fight. And then so they're throwing each other around, specifically like the monster's throwing her around because she's stronger.
Mhm.
And Wes goes up to Dan and goes, "Your girlfriend doesn't have a chance.
Yeah.
Our woman is superior in every way." And I'm like, "In what way?"
Yeah, she's like it's kind of weird because it's like he seems like so proud of this creation, and it's like all right, even if it was like you know like uh had like even if it was like the same soul or something as like the woman he loved, like it's still like this like exposed like bloody corpse. Like
Yeah.
I would find it really hard to like still love something like that.
When he rejects her later, he's like, "Oh, I don't want your body," and I'm like,
Yeah.
"I just lay it on thick, Dan. Don't sugarcoat it in any way." And then she kind of rejects her body, and as soon as she starts like ripping apart, Wes is just because he's trying to fight off the hordes of like reanimated corpses that are trying to fight their way into the basement at this point. He's like, "Dan, record the time for data purposes. Rejecting tissue."
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, he's still got a scientific mind. I'll give him that. I'll give him that much. But actually, one of my favorite shot in the movie is when the body's ripping apart, and she's on like the table, and there's like this red light, and it's this really demonic kind of
Yeah,
scream that's happening as she's ripping apart. It felt very, almost like H.R. Giger-esque the way it was like doing
I could see
this.
that. Yeah.
But I thought that's when it was visually perked up quite a bit for me. I was like, oh, okay, that looked quite cool.
Yeah, yeah, that stuff looked really great. Actually, one of the scenes I really liked was when West is showing him like the body for the first time, and he's like very proud of it, and he's kind of going through all the different parts.
Oh yeah, the
And
feet of a ballerina who didn't think she was good enough, so she cut off her own feet and then bled to death.
but like it's just so funny though because it starts off pretty strong, but then like by the time it gets to the end, he's just like, yeah, like the feet of the ballerina, the womb of the virgin, which is kind of weird. But then like when he gets to the end, he's like the arms of a waitress. It's like okay, like is
Actually,
that?
not only that, at the very end, because it's different arms. When he gets to the last arm, he basically just speculates. He doesn't know. He's like,
Oh yeah,
this mysterious hand. What could she have been? Could she have been an artist, maybe? And I'm like,
yeah,
maybe, sure. Like, what's the chances that anyone's an artist?
yeah.
Maybe.
Oh, and
Um,
then I like one of the other hands. He's like the hand of a lawyer, and he goes case dismissed, and it's like so like it's he like Combs sells it so well because like he does it like so elegant and with a straight face that like you can't help but love it, but it's so like stupid.
The one that really cracked me up is like, oh, and these thighs of a prostitute who were
Oh yeah,
the pimp killed her after a dispute last week, and just who knows how many bodies these legs were wrapped around, and I'm like, why is that a selling point? Why is that a selling point? I don't
yeah,
understand. But somehow this convinces Dan to
yeah,
stick around and go, you know what? Yeah, let's reanimate her. Let's put Meg's heart in there, and I'll
yeah.
maybe think about giving her one. I don't know.
Really like I think if I was Dan, I think I would have just been like, you know what, this is all you, man. Like it definitely seems like more your thing. Like
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's just weird. It never feels like he's really on board. He just kind of keeps going along with
Yeah.
things and then starts to question it too late. And of course, we said this in the first movie. I think it's even more true here. That the female characters are definitely not like
Oh
great
yeah.
examples of role models or anything. They're there to serve the plot of the men. That's just kind of the way it is.
Yeah. Like like even the bride, like once it gets reanimated, like you know you could have had her had like some agency or something, like maybe she rejects
Yeah,
them or something, but you know instead she's just kind of like this lovesick, like, oh, why don't you want me, Dan, kind of
yeah,
thing.
and then it turns into a cat fight with a cracking jokes
Yeah.
about the cat fight. And admittedly, the joke did make me laugh because it was kind of funny, but
Oh yeah,
it is worth pointing out again. It is definitely not a feminist film, I guess,
for
as we'll
sure.
say. But hey, yeah, it's kind of it's a weird mess. It's kind of a weird
Yeah.
mess. But it's not necessarily always it's not a bad weird mess or a hard to watch weird mess. There's definitely
Yeah.
things to enjoy in there.
Yeah, like it's you know it's longer than the first one, like it's only 90 minutes instead of like 85 or whatever, but like uh but it definitely like wasn't boring, it didn't drag, it didn't make me angry. There were flaws, but overall it's still, I think it's still good, still enjoyable. There's
Yeah,
enough there
it
that
didn't do any of those things, but I do think I was zoning out a little bit more. Like I wasn't necessarily paying attention as always as much as I should have been, or as I
yeah,
was in the first one. I was maybe checking my phone a bit more often because I was like, like, there's a whole like 5 to 10 minute sequence of the detective telling Francesca about what might have happened at the massacre, and I'm like,
yeah,
okay, we kind of know all this information. This is not really for us.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, you,
yeah,
you could have just
yeah,
cut away as soon as he started talking to her, and then have her be doubtful later on. But that's the thing. This is before she comes to dinner, so she comes to dinner and still has sex with Dan. Like it actually affects nothing. It affects nothing in this scene.
yeah, and yeah, I think definitely the cop was the weakest part of the
Yeah,
movie. Like all his stuff was a little boring. Like I mean, like the one good scene with him was probably like when he's over the house and like the little thing with the fingers and the eyeballs and stuff is kind of scurrying around, and they're kind of trying to make sure he doesn't see it, like that kind
yeah.
of stuff is
It's
funny. But
basically the Fawlty Towers scene where Basil's trying to catch the rat in the dining hall without anyone knowing there's a rat. It's basically that scene.
I never seen Faulty Towers, but
You'd like it, Tim. I think it'd appeal to your sense of humor.
it's John Cleese,
Yep.
right? That's it.
It's only 12 episodes as well, so it's not a
Oh really? Oh,
it's not a big commitment to watch. It's 12 half-hour episodes, so
I'll have to check it out.
yeah,
Yeah, I definitely like him. It's just one of those things I never
yeah.
get around to. But
No, it's good stuff. Um, Also, it's fun to watch a sitcom from the 70s now and just see how
oh yeah,
different things are. Um, that old classic thing where the couples are sleeping in two separate beds because we can't have couples sleeping together on TV. Oh no.
it was a British sitcom though, right? Like they couldn't do that over there, you know?
Um, I mean, I actually don't know if that was a rule at the time, or if the point was their marriage is just in a bad place and so they don't want to sleep in the same bed. Like that might have been the case, but I feel like it might have been a thing in the 70s, and
Yeah.
whatever.
Like I know definitely like in America it was. I just didn't know if extended to other places.
My cat's moving the camera around.
Oh, say your room's starting to collapse.
Yeah, the sneaky little ginger shit that he is. I can see you, Firefly. I see you behind that TV. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have much more to say about Bride of Frankenstein. It's kind of it kind of. I mean, it took sorry, Bride of Re-Animator. So it's a slip. That was a fair slip to make.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like it feels like a sequel that was rushed out, although bizarrely it was actually 4 years later, because the first one was
Yeah.
'85 and this one was '89. So
Mhm.
even though it feels like there was a bunch of time, it feels like it was one that was rushed out, and as a result, it feels like it was kind of slapped together in terms of plot to just kind of work. It's like it felt like it was kind of the obvious idea, like oh, the obvious idea, yeah, we'll do Bride of Re-Animator, and it'll be
Yeah.
like the Frankenstein creation, and like okay, sure, but I don't know if they just put enough time into the script to actually make it completely work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's fair. I think I do think yeah, that little featurette thing I was watching, I do think they said that they were on a time crunch. They did have to rush it. So even though yeah, it is like several years after the first one, I think for whatever reason they still only had like a limited time frame once they decided to do the movie, which I think you can kind of feel like
yeah,
the rush that's in there. Um
even just in the sets, the fact that they're at the same hospital, and then there's the one
yeah.
new house with the basement, and that's basically where the movie's set for the entire time.
Mhm.
You can kind of feel that they were like, oh, how do we get this to work? And and even when they're in Peru, you don't see Peru. You're just in like a
Mhm.
tent. You're in the military
Yeah.
tent the whole time, which is fine. Like I'm not really criticizing that. I'm just it's just it's more evidence to suggest that yeah, this was kind of rushed and kind of slapped together in a lot of ways. Um,
Yeah.
but not a terrible watch by any means. So,
Oh no,
um,
definitely not.
I guess we should rate it, Tim. What would you rate Bride of Re-Animator?
Mm, yeah. Yeah, obviously, really like the first one. You went pretty high with that one.
Oh,
Definitely can't do.
you went like silly high. You went like 9 or 9.5 or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll stand by that. I think it's a really, really, good, tight movie that holds up. Obviously, you can't go that high with this one. But again, I don't want to go super low. So I'm thinking this is definitely like six territory. It's kind of deciding between 6.5. I'll give it a six. I'm not feeling very generous today, but it's still
Yeah,
enjoyable though. It's not a bad watch.
yeah. I'd probably go a little bit lower. I'd probably go with 5.5. I think it's just a little bit better than that midway point because it does have some great effects and it has a couple of good scenes towards the end. And Jeffrey Combs is still very good, but the
Yeah.
plot and the pacing are definitely messed up compared to the first one, and it does pale in comparison. So
Yeah.
I can't go super high with it. But hey, that is Bride of Reanimator. So of course, let us know what you thought of that one in the comments below. Like and subscribe and all that stuff. Get us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV if you want to support the channel, especially in this gracious time of Halloween of the Octoberthon. We're pumping out all these extra episodes. If you want to show your support, head over to Patreon and consider becoming a patron, and you get some bonus stuff. You get some stuff early. You get to vote once a month on a Screams episode. There was 3 votes for October. If you were a patron during September, you had 3 votes you could vote for.
Oh,
I know, I know. It's a time of giving, Halloween, Timmy. It's a time of giving. If not candy, then something else. So, but yeah, you can do that. You can also support us, of course, other ways. You don't have to feel bad if you can't do that. You can, of course, watch the ads on YouTube, turn off your ad block. You can like, subscribe, comment, all the usual stuff. Share us on Twitter. All of that stuff does help. But that is us. So of course we'll be back very soon with another episode because it is October. It's the Octoberthon. We'll be back with the third Re-Animator movie, Beyond Re-Animator, next week. So look forward to that. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching scary movies, guys, and we'll see you next time.